Hello, dear friends. Patrick here. Saturday, March 9th, 2024. It's about 5 degrees Celsius, about 40 degrees Fahrenheit out today. A rainy day today, perfect sleeping weather. And just following up, I'm going to do a quick video on chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12 of the Canadian Corruption from 1985 to 1995 by Peter C. Newman. You notice I changed the title of the book there to be a little bit more accurate. Chapter 9, now we noticed in the previous chapters, we talked about the corporate corruption, the political corruption, and the cooperation of the bankers with the corporatocracy and the political establishment. And these chapters were moving on and getting into a little bit more detail on a few individuals. In particular, Chapter 9 deals with Brian Mulroney. He was Prime Minister of Canada from 1984 to 1993, so that covers most of that decade. He was the Prime Minister. And the funny thing is that in the earlier chapters, the author is very sharp and targeted in evaluating the people that he's talking about, whereas when he's dealing with Mulroney, Chapter 9 deals with Mulroney. It's called The Blow-Dried Revolutionary, and the subtitle is The Mulroney Factor. And when he's dealing with Mulroney and John Turner in the next chapter in particular, he's a lot softer. And it makes sense because if this is published in 96, he still wants to be on the good side of those people in power. And at the time, Mulroney had just left office, so there's a possibility he could have been returning. And of course, the same goes for John Turner. Pardon me, just having a bit of tea this morning for a change, getting off the coffee. So yeah, Chapter 9 is about Brian Mulroney. It's like a mini biography. It's extremely boring. I'm going to see if there was anything that jumped out at me. I'm going to go through and see if I took any notes. The only person who may be interested in this is maybe a candidate for the Conservative Party to see what he did that worked, what didn't work. It's just very tedious. It goes on and on and on. And like I said, it doesn't reveal any specific scandals. Mulroney was a big proponent of free trade with the United States, and he won a very powerful victory, but very quickly lost favor with the people during his time in office, even though he was in office for quite some time. So I noticed a statement here that the author made, and it jumped out at me, so I thought I'd share it with you. On page 282, he says, "An existence only in opposition to something turns to vapor when that something disappears." Did you catch that? An existence only in opposition to something turns to vapor when that something disappears. And it made me think because of other things that I had been working on. So I don't know if that means anything to you, but I thought it was kind of cool. So here, look at this. I'm reading through this, taking no notes, just listening to blah, 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 about his relationships with his different advisors, the different people that he appointed to patronage positions, and talking about the comments made by his wife Mila and his spending. You know, he was known for spending so much money on his suits and his shoes, but nothing really dramatic as far as, any kind of scandals, which I'm sure there was, but again, covered up by the author. He says here, a quote from page 303, I thought that was interesting. He said, "One essential precondition of a revolutionary climate is the demonization of authority." Interesting. The good thing about the chapter is that it does reflect, because this is so long ago, written 30 years ago, you can compare it to what's happening in the Canadian political climate today, and you can see where history is repeating itself in a number of different distinct areas. So that is kind of cool to see that. But to see the amount of largesse and corruption and waste, you can only imagine how much more it is magnified today. And the numbers that they're using, you can see how much more it's magnified today. It's an extremely boring chapter. He just goes on and on and on about Mulroney. Now, chapter 10 is about John Turner, and he's even softer on John Turner. John Turner, was only prime minister in 1984 for like 4 months. And, pardon me, this is making me a little bit... Sorry about that. He calls John Turner handsome and good looking. To do a chapter on John Turner without mentioning his nervous laugh. Remember John Turner, he'd do that all the time. He's giving him really, really wide berth and doesn't mention anything, any serious gaffes that he may have made. He made some, but he's very, very light on Turner, probably because published at a time when he thinks John Turner may return to office, and the author was constantly ingratiating himself to the political establishment. He was a journalist, but he was able to participate in all these inner circle meetings. He would go to lunch with politicians. He would go to lunch with all these movers and shakers from Bay Street. And so he had an inside view of what was going on, and he didn't want to jeopardize that. So he had to be very, very careful. So kind of a short chapter on John Turner, but there you go. That was chapter 10. Chapter 11, called Phantom of the Canadian Opera, Trudeau's Revenge. He does another chapter on Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Now, Trudeau was prime minister from 68 to 79 and also from 1980 to 84. So he was the prime minister before Mulroney. And of course, you know that his son is in power today. And the son has been in power for 9 years. That seems to be kind of a limit for Canadian prime ministers, 9 years. There's a couple that were prime ministers for 9 years, and then they tanked. Harper was prime minister for 9 years. Who else was prime minister for 9 years? I'm trying to think. There was one other one as well. I think Jean Chrétien was prime minister for about 9 or 10 years. Anyway, doesn't matter. He talks about the conflict of repatriating the Constitution and then the whole Meech Lake Accord effort by Brian Mulroney, and it's boring and inconsequential, but if you're interested in that, you may want to check it out. There was one statement he made here that was kind of interesting that also applies to us today. He says, every citizen now constituted a nation of one. There was this sense of a collapse of solidarity amongst the citizens of the country of Canada, and now people are feeling a lot more isolated. And he goes on to detail that. Now listen to this, how somebody is making this statement back in 1996 or before, saying that pluralism has run wild, warned John Meisel, the Queen's University political scientist at that time, right? It says pluralism has run wild. We have become so blinded by the notion that there is no national interest, only special interests, that we're incapable of pursuing policies designed to be of general benefit to the whole community. Politicians had to relearn their craft. The party system seemed marginalized as priorities had to pass muster not only with cabinet and caucus, but with the anticipated lobbies of the interest groups, whether of the right or the left. The most powerful of these pleaders were the Business Council on National Issues, which believed its briefs ought to be cabinet directives, and the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, which believed it was the government. Neither group was as inclusive as it maintained. And so you see this beginning of the special interest lobby groups. It's quite interesting to see how that formed. And, there was a woman that was appointed to a high status CEO position, but the national, the Committee on the Status of Women complained because even though she was white, it wasn't enough for them, right? It said, if white and privileged, she must apologize that her experience of the world is cruelly limited by her background. Virtue also requires a certain set of narrowly prescribed beliefs and behaviors, beginning with the belief that the market system is evil, individual achievement suspect, and big businesses are instruments of human oppression. This is a comment from the head of the National Action Committee on Women at that time, and so you could see how that has only increased over time, that type of sentiment amongst special interest groups, not just that particular group. Trudeau turned the nearly balanced books he had inherited into a $38.5 billion deficit and increased the national debt by 1,200%, from $17 billion to more than $200 billion. This is something that Pierre Trudeau accomplished, and you can see that his son is trying to outdo him in increasing the national debt and collapsing the Canadian economy. So that hasn't changed at all. We're seeing that reflected in inflation and in the devaluation of the Canadian dollar that we're experiencing today. So the good thing is that the author does throw in some of those specific statistics and data for the reader. Page 338, he says, "For too long this country has suffered from politics that stresses economic efficiency instead of social fairness, and it's in that direction our party must make its next policy thrust." This is something that Trudeau said. It was at a private party in April of 1988, right? I just want to make sure I'm quoting. Yeah, so Trudeau was the one who started, and don't forget, this is Justin Trudeau's father. He's speaking at a private function in Ottawa, apparently, according to the author, on April 6, 1988, and it was an anniversary for his time in power, so it's kind of like a private party. And this is a comment that he made. He said, "For too long, we've only been, politics stressing economic efficiency instead of social fairness." He says that's the direction we have to go in the future. He was all about moving into social justice, and you can see that's where the social justice movement in Canada politically, partially anyway, started, was with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the father of Justin Trudeau. And Justin Trudeau has absolutely taken up the mantle in that area of his ideology, no doubt about that. Chapter 12 is entitled "The End of Entitlement, Goodbye Charlie Brown." And the title of that chapter, "Goodbye Charlie Brown," I just want to mention this before I go, is how important a single person can be. This chapter again is talking about Mulroney again, and it's kind of his downfall. So it's repeating the time, and it makes sense because Mulroney was in power for most of the decade that the author is wanting to cover in this book. But the subtitle of the chapter, "Goodbye Charlie Brown," there was a single person, an individual, and I probably took notes on it if I was smart here. Did I take notes on that part of the chapter? Let me just see. Yeah. Okay. So he was doing a somewhere. He was outside, right? Where am I? He was out, and he had been having lunch at 24 Sussex Drive with some of his cronies, and then he had left. That's the Prime Minister's residence, by the way, as you know, right? 24 Sussex Drive. And as he was leaving his house, he got surrounded by a bunch of protesters. And one of the protesters was a 63-year-old woman by the name of Solange Denis. And she yelled at him. She said, "You lied to us. You made us vote for you. Then goodbye, Charlie Brown. If you do anything to the pensions, you won't get back in 3 years," she shouted at him, right? And Mulroney turned around and said, "I'm listening to you, madam." So he didn't have much to say, right? So in other words, Mulroney came into power and said, "Oh, I'm not going to touch people's pensions and everything's going to be fine and dandy." And he went back on his promise and then ended up reducing the amount of pensions that was available to seniors in Canada, right? Pardon me. And so that was kind of like apparently a defining moment. But the reason why I wanted to share that with you and take notes on it is because it tells you the power of a single voice. If a person can dedicate themselves to truth and is able to speak that truth, in this society today, everybody is trying to get their voice heard. Everybody is trying to say their opinion, and nobody is listening to anybody else. And those voices that sort of bubble up and rise to the top, you know, the blue check marks and the what they call the influencers and this person and that person, their voice gets magnified. And so those people are in a powerful position. But that can happen when the timing is right, when the circumstances are right, when there is an opportunity to speak up. Make sure you take advantage of that opportunity, because you don't know how powerful that statement of truth can get repeated and echoed and magnified. Even though we're simply, you know, individuals in a ocean of people that are trying to be heard, there are times when, like this person, you know, she has been memorialized, at least in this book anyway, by Peter C. Newman. And we don't know anything about her, but she made this statement. You know, you said you made us vote for you, and then goodbye, Charlie Brown. It's a funny thing to say, but it stuck, and it got repeated and magnified, and people said, yeah, he just kind of abandoned all his promises. Well, probably not all his promises. I'm sure he was trying hard in some areas to be a benefit to Canada, but for the most part, the position of the Prime Minister in Canada has been a position of cooperating with big business, cooperating with bankers, giving favors to the people that are close to him, collecting as much money for friends and colleagues and himself as possible during his tenure as Prime Minister. It's all about feeding at the trough. It's all about not so much direct bribery, but it's about influence, right? It's about influence and power and deception and backstabbing and power struggles and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And patronage appointments especially is a huge one, right? Who gets to have this position that gives them huge annual salaries and then huge annual pensions even after they leave politics? And we're seeing the same thing today. That's all the politicians care about, is their fat salaries and their fat pensions. So that's about it for now. The next chapters are going to be dealing with. I started the next chapter, which is chapter 13, is talking about the. It's called Rebellion West. So the remaining chapters are talking about geographical situations of the Canadian landscape, right? There's Rebellion East, Rebellion West, and then the epigraph of two-party states. So I guess that there's going to be one talking about the NDP, I imagine, by the sounds of it. Anyway, that's it for this review. How am I doing for time? I'm still got to get these videos shorter. Sorry about that. But that's part 3, and I should be able to finish it with one more video, part 4. It's not a book I would recommend unless you're really into Canadian politics or something. It's tedious, it's long, it's boring. It started off as being fun and clever when he's poking fun at these different corporate CEOs that are either incompetent or corrupt or both. But then it quickly becomes repetitive and I don't know, just inconsequential, especially the chapter on Mulroney. That's like trying to walk through quicksand. If I didn't have insomnia, I would never be able to get through such a tedious evaluation of a person's life. It's just horrible. Anyway, hopefully the next book I find is going to be more interesting for myself and for you, the potential viewer of this video, maybe down the road. Somebody may want to watch this video. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you. I hope you're able to spend time with people you love. I hope you're happy and healthy. Wherever you are, I love you. Thank you for watching. God bless you. Have yourself a wonderful day and enjoy the good weather. Hopefully you have good weather where you are. Where I am, it's sleeping weather. It's rainy. Take care. We'll talk to you again soon.